I'm Rabbi Danny Saxton of the Sunny Road Kehillah in Johannesburg, South Africa. The 4th of Elul 2026 is the 100th YARZEIT of Rabbi Meir Simcha HaKohen Katz, the great author of the Or Sameach and the Meshech Chochmah. Rabbi Meir Simcha was one of the greatest rabbinic leaders in the last 200 years. And although he and his wife did not have children, they had one daughter who died at a young age, which was very painful for them. He often spoke of not having descendants to say Kaddish for him. The Rosh Yeshiva of Or Sameach Yeshiva, Rabbi Notzes Schiller, of blessed memory, said that although Rabbi Meir Simcha didn't have children, all the students of our yeshiva will be his children. And therefore we'll name our institution after him. And there are many institutions that have been named after him. And myself, being a Talmud of Or Sameach, also then is like a child of Rabbi Meir Simcha, and therefore I felt compelled to speak about him and to share with you some incredible aspects of his life which should be an inspiration to us all. So as mentioned, Rabbi Meir Simcha wrote the Or Sameach, a work of immense genius on the Rambam, explaining how the Rambam got to his halachic rulings in the Mishnah Torah. And Rabbi Meir Simcha showed how all of the works of the Rambam are already one single unit. His Perush HaMishnayos, his Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, which he knew of by heart, are all one single thread within the thinking of the Rambam. Meshech Chochmah, which is a Perush on the Torah, was also a work of immense genius. Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, the great genius of Vilna, he used to prepare for the Parsha on a Friday together with the Meshech Chochmah. Such was the esteem of Rabbi Meir Simcha by even the Gedolim in Europe. Rabbi Meir Simcha was born in 1843 in a small little town in Lithuania called Baltamans. And already by his bar mitzvah, he was renowned as an up-and-coming scholar, and he joined the famous Kollel of Perushim in Eisenstock in Lithuania. Although the rest of the members of the Kollel were married, he was not married, but he climbed the ranks very quickly and became one of the top Talmidim. When he married his wife Chaya, he went to live in Bialystok, which is where the town that she was from. And Chaya's father was a well-known businessman, a very accomplished person. And instead of Chaya's son was Chaim Makovsky, instead of supporting his son-in-law and wife, he put his daughter in business. And Chaya was a brilliant woman herself, well educated, which was rare at that time for Jewish women. She knew Nach Baal Peh. She ran a business, and she was a very successful businesswoman. She was a very smart, astute person. Rabbi Meir Simcha said his 18 years in Bialystok, he studied Torah for 18 hours a day. And it was there that he wrote his great works of Or Sameach and Meshech Chochmah. He only published them many years later. He said his advice to young Talmidei Chachamim, even if they wrote Sfarim at young ages, was to hold back on their printing until they became established and became known, and then there would be a name behind the Sefer, only then to print the Sefer, which is what he did himself. When in 1887, the rabbi of Dvinsk passed away. His name was Rabbi Reuven Dennenberg, and he was one of the great Gedolim of Lithuania and Latvia of the time. When he passed away, they were looking for a rabbi of the caliber of Rabbi Dennenberg. And so Dvinsk is a town, today it's in Latvia, but the borders moved considerably over the last number of centuries. It was already one zone under the control of Tsarist Russia. And it was one of the Jewish centers of Eastern Europe, Dvinsk. They were looking for a Rav. Rabbi Meir Simcha never applied for the position, but he was recommended by Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, the Beis Halevi, and by Rabbi Yitzchak Diskin, the son of Rav Yeshua Leib Diskin. And they both put in a very strong recommendation for him. And although he didn't make an application, he was offered the position based on the recommendations. So there were many other great Rabbonim who applied for the position, but because of the strength of those recommendations from those great people, they offered the position to Rabbi Meir Simcha, who at that point had no experience of being a community Rav, had no history of knowing what it was like to be a community Rav, but nonetheless, he was such a great person that they were confident that he would succeed, and of course that was the case. Rav Meir Simcha, he would say that he had there was another great genius, Talmid Chacham, who lived in Dvinsk at this time. His name was Rabbi Yosef Rosen, the Rogachover Rebbe. And Rav Meir Simcha would say that Hashem got him back, because when he was a child, he would sit in at the Shabbos Hagadol Drosha and the Shabbos Shuvah Drosha of the rabbi of the town that he was in. Remember, in Europe in those days, the Rabbonim didn't speak much community. They didn't give many public lectures, unlike the Rabbonim of today. But only twice a year would be a platform for them to show the community the depth of their learning, the breadth of their learning, and they would deal with complicated halachic questions. The Shabbos Hagadol and Shabbos Shuvah Drosha would be 2 hours, 2.5 hours a time, which certainly wouldn't go down today, would it? And Rav Meir Simcha would attend those lectures, and very often he would pipe up and he would correct the Rav, and he would say that's not the right understanding of that Chazal, and it's not the right application of that principle. And usually he was right. So he said many years later, when he was the Rav of Dvinsk, that Hashem got him back for the exuberance of his youth and put the Rogachover as a rabbi in the town where he was the Rav, which obviously was not a simple thing at all, because the Rogachover was so brilliant and so sharp and so on the ball that it was not easy for the Rav Meir Simcha to be the Rav in the town where the Rogachover was. In Dvinsk, he became renowned not only for his tremendous scholarship and genius, but for his love of the community and for his treatment of people, for his Avas Yisrael. And I'll give you a few examples of that. And by the way, he suggested that his wife should no longer be in business when they moved to Dvinsk, because he said when one is in business, there always are conflicts and there always are going to be disputes. And if there are disputes amongst Jews, they would bring them to the Rav to adjudicate and to decide what the right thing to do would be between these disagreeing parties. And if she's in business, inevitably the cases would come to him, and he would not be impartial, and he would have a conflict of interest, and therefore it would be better that she wasn't in business, and she agreed, and she then stopped becoming a businesswoman, and they lived then off the meager rabbinic salary that he received, and they had to drop their standard of living in how they lived in Bialystok when they moved to Dvinsk as a result of that. Rav Meir Simcha, when he paskin shilas, so in those days the Rabbonim paskin many shilas like shilas and kashrus. Today, we buy our meat from the butchery or our chickens from the butchery, and it's all ready for us. But in those days there were many shilas in those regards. The shochet would come to town, and then there might be shilas on the animal that they shechted, whether it's a treif or not. They'd have to do the melicha themselves, and very often the shilas would go to the Rav, and he would have to decide. And if it wasn't good, it would be a big loss to the person. But Rav Meir Simcha, when he had to tell people that it wasn't good, he never did it in a negative and harsh way. He always said something like, Hamakom Yamalech Esroinam, Hashem should make up your loss. Instead of saying, it's treif and it's no good, he would say, Hashem should bless you in other areas, despite this loss that you have to endure over here. Another example is that if the plates were not kosher because there was a mistake made in the kitchen or something like that, which is very common, that we all encounter in our kosher kitchens. So if the plate itself had to be destroyed, it's going to be kosher, Rav Meir Simcha would say, save that plate, and Hashem should send you a simcha when your son or daughter gets engaged, and that will be the plate that you break. So he was gentle, and he was kind, and he was compassionate. And that manifested in all of his dealings with the people of Dvinsk and the people of the surrounding areas. Rav Meir Simcha was somebody who gave smicha fairly easily. There are different streams of thought, different schools in terms of smicha. Some say that some say one should only get a smicha or give a smicha when the Talmud is a Talmid Chacham, an accomplished Talmid Chacham, and has learned for many years and has mastered the material. And some say if there's a person who has good midas and Yerushalayim and is on the road and has accomplished something in the learning and but will eventually get there, they can already get the smicha and they won't abuse it, and they will teach Torah in Klal Yisrael and be a Kiddush Hashem. Rav Meir Simcha was of that latter school, and if somebody wanted smicha, they would go to live with him for a number of months, and he would see the person, he would see their midas, he would see their learning, and then he would go out there smicha, and he would say that in the smicha that there's been a number of months that this person has stayed by me, and I see that they have the character and they have the knowledge to be a Rov in Klal Yisrael. It was actually well known that the Kovner Rov, Rav Yitzhak Elchanan Spektor, he was such a great person and a person of tremendous genius. He would give smicha very easily in Europe, and therefore, to the extent that if he had a smicha from Rav Yitzhak Elchanan, it didn't really count for much. The smicha of Rav Meir Simcha counted for a lot more, but he was fairly quick to do so. He did regret not having his own yeshiva. He was involved in the great yeshivas of Lithuania. He would go there, he would test the Talmidim. He would not only test if they knew the information, but if they had a depth of understanding in their learning. He was used, his genius was used by the yeshivas in the region, in the area, which obviously made his renown even more by the general Jewish community of Eastern Europe. He was also a very strong person. He would not back down on his opinions, on his views. If there was a famous dispute in town between two very wealthy Jewish businessmen, two most wealthy Jewish men of Dvinsk. They both wanted a certain property, and the seller, who was a Jew, didn't know what to do, and went to Rav Meir Simcha, and he took both of those potential buyers, and he tried to find a compromise. Neither of them were interested in compromising, so he took them to the building, and he said to the building, this is how the legend goes, he said to the building, both of these individuals want you, neither of them will compromise, but they will both end up in the ground. That's what he said. And they both heard that, and they're, oh gosh, we better become a little bit more flexible. And that's how he got them to compromise. So he was a formidable person, and did not back down, and stood by his principles, even though he was a very kind, gentle, compassionate person. There are many stories about how Rav Meir Simcha dealt with couples, and the couples were, if couples were having difficulties in their marriage, they would go to him to try and sort things out. And there are also some fascinating stories, which I heard from my Rabbi Wein, and most of what I'm telling you I heard from Rabbi Wein, where he describes that a couple came to see Rav Meir Simcha, and the husband wanted to get divorced, and Rav Meir Simcha saw that there was still plenty to work through before this marriage should end, and he eventually saw the couple together, and he said to the man, he said, look in the eyes of your wife. How can you divorce a woman with eyes like that? He said such a thing. There was another amazing story, which is incredible, and they stayed together. Another amazing story that a couple were having difficulty, and they were on the verge of divorce, and he was able to help them work through their issues, and they decided that they would continue to stay together and make a success of their marriage. And when they said that, he got up and he started dancing, and his wife walked in, and she said, after they left, she said to him, it's not appropriate that a rov of your stature should dance like that. He said, so he quoted the case in Tanakh. His wife knew, as mentioned, Tanakh very well. He said, remember when David was dancing in front of the Aron HaKodesh, and his wife Michal criticized him and said, how could you dance like that? You're the Melech Yisrael. It's not appropriate. And he said, I was dancing in front of the Shekhinah. It's appropriate for everybody to dance in front of the Shekhinah, even the Melech. So that's what he said. Ish ve'ish zachu Shekhinah b'neim. I was dancing in front of the Shekhinah like David HaMelech, and therefore certainly it was appropriate. He was very opposed to the secularization of the Jewish people, and he felt that that was going to be disastrous for Klal Yisrael. And in fact, he shared the unbelievable prophecy. He was prophetic. He writes in Meshech Chochmah, in Parshas B'chul Koisai. He says that, Oi, woe to those who call Berlin Jerusalem. He said their fate will not be a good one. It's going to lead to terrible calamity and disaster in Klal Yisrael. And as we know, a few decades later, the Holocaust came from Berlin. Incredible that he could see that. And he knew that moving away from Torah, moving away from mitzvahs, was going to be a disaster for Klal Yisrael, and he saw it in front of his eyes in Europe as the young generations were not following in the footsteps of their ancestors, and they were being pulled out of a religious and observant life towards socialism, towards communism, towards secular Zionism. Although he was a big supporter of Zionism, and he felt that Zionism was a powerful movement that would bring Jews back to Judaism, and it was very important for Jews to go to Eretz Yisrael. He was very strong and very in favor of that. But the secularization of the Jewish people was something that bothered him deeply, and he warned of the impending destruction if the Jewish people would continue to move away from the Torah. But even though he fought the secularization of Jewish people, he had great compassion for individual Jews, even secular Jews. Like there was the gymnasia, which was like the secular high school. If somebody went to gymnasia, it wasn't from. And they often would come to Rabbi Meir Simcha to help them get through their exams. And he was such a genius. He was a mathematical genius. He would help them. He would help these boys because he had compassion for them. There's an incredible story about a young Jewish socialist. The move, the pull towards socialism at that time, at the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, was very, very strong. Because people thought that this is the solution to the world's problems. This is a utopian society that we could build, in which there's equality, in which there is no suffering, in which there is freedom, and in which people could work together in harmony. Such was the socialist dream. But the last 100 years we've seen that every single time that dream's turned into a horrible nightmare, and has resulted not in freedom and equality, but rather in the suffering of the masses, and in a dictatorship and a regime that oppresses the people very severely. And there's not one single example of that working anywhere in the world, even though it's been tried amongst many, many different countries and many different cultures. It always inevitably ends up, the socialist communist dream, into a disaster, because as Margaret Thatcher said, it's only for so long that you could give away other people's money, and it always implodes from inside and goes bankrupt. But it's unbelievable that even though we've had that history in the world, we still have young people today that believe that socialism is the solution to the world's problems, and they want to replace the democracies of the West and capitalism with social, which is just, it boggles the mind that they're so ignorant and don't see the destructive, disastrous policies that socialism brings to the people. So that was very strong in Rav Meir Simcha's day too. And a young radical Jewish socialist assassinated the chief of police in Dvinsk. And he was caught, and they were about to try him. And his mother came to Rabbi Meir Simcha and said, please, you have to help my son, and you have to write a protest, and you have to write a letter to the Tsar in his defense. And Rav Meir Simcha, so most people would have said, he had it coming, he was a radical socialist, there's nothing I can do. Rav Meir Simcha moved heaven and earth to try and save this boy. And he arranged prayer vigils in the shul, and he wrote letters, and he tried to put pressure on the politicians. He was a very respected person in the community and in the general community, and so he had quite a lot of weight. And eventually they commuted his sentence, and they didn't execute him, but they gave him time in jail. And then on the Tsar's birthday, they released him, and he actually got out, this boy, largely due to the efforts of Rabbi Meir Simcha. And so we see his unbelievable love for his fellow Jews, and the efforts he went to assist his fellow Jews, and his phenomenal Ahavas Yisrael. World War I, when it broke out, so most of the Pale of Settlement and the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe were on the front lines. And so the Jews had to flee in their thousands because they didn't want to be where the war was. And many of the Rabbanim fled, and many of the community fled. Rav Meir Simcha, Dvinsk was also in the front lines. Rav Meir Simcha and his wife said, or he famously said, that if there are 9 Jews in Dvinsk, I will be the 10th. And they didn't leave. and their home became a haven in which they took in refugees, they took in orphans, they took in people that were injured. They used to cut the wood themselves every day to keep the people in their home warm. They did incredible things. They were legendary at that time. In 1907, the Rov of Yerushalayim, the Aderes, passed away, and they wanted Reb Meir Simcha to take over and be the Rov of Yerushalayim. He wanted to go. He was a very passionate lover of Eretz Yisrael, and it would be a great dream for him to be a Rov in Yerushalayim. And they were going to go, but the community in Dvinsk surrounded their house and wouldn't let them leave. Such was their love and respect for Rab Meir Simcha and his wife. There was another famous case where, so after World War I, there was the Russian Revolution, and the Bolsheviks took over, the communists took over, and they were in control. And they arrested Rabbi Meir Simcha as a religious provocateur. And he was then interrogated by what was called the Cheka in those days, but it became the NKVD, the KGB, it's all the same thing. And his interrogator was a Jew. And this Jew, his family had been helped by Rab Meir Simcha in the past. And he released him. And he wrote up the reason why. And that was very dangerous for him, because they could have actually, also executed this individual, saying, he did it incorrectly and was an enemy of the people and of the revolution, that he did so at risk to his own life. That was his respect for Rab Meir Simcha, even though he was a communist. And so his legend was absolutely phenomenal, and his impact in the in the Jewish world, the Jewish community was tremendous. There was actually a famous incident in 1910. The Russian minister had an issue with the Rabbonim in the empire, because he said they needed to have a secular education, Russian history. And he put a tremendous amount of pressure on the Rabbonim at the time. They had a big meeting that he convened, and Rav Meir Simcha was there, and the Osameach was there, the Chavetz Chaim was there, and Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was there, and they were very opposed to Rabbonim having any Russian education. Rav Meir Simcha actually compromised, and he felt that it was possible to reach a compromise and to have some sort of Russian education as a Rav. And they actually clashed, but he didn't back down. And even though they all loved each other, these great Rabbonim, and they had different opinions, but he stood firm on his opinion. And the Chavetz Chaim went to see him in his hotel, and the Chavetz Chaim was putting his argument forward very passionately, and Rav Meir Simcha was beginning to get a little bit obsessed with the Chavetz Chaim. Can you believe such a thing? And he said to the Chavetz Chaim, I just need to take a bit of a break. He would get up, walk out the room, take a deep breath, come back and say, sorry, I was getting angry, but I'm now ready to carry on. The Chavetz Chaim said it was just incredible to see a person with such phenomenal midas. They were both Kohanim, so they were both quite passionate. Kohanim are known to have strong views and a bit of a temper. Yet they were so loving and respectful of each other. But this was the person that he was, an incredible and unbelievable individual. So we remember Rav Meir Simcha, and we remember his genius, of course, in Torah and in learning. And that should be an inspiration to all of us to dedicate our lives to the learning of Torah and to the fulfilling of Hashem's mitzvahs, the purpose for which we were created. And a big part of that is Ahavas Yisrael, is loving our fellow Jews, is having compassion for our fellow Jews, is being a person of kindness, of chesed, a person who feels the pain of others and does what we can to support and assist those around us. Such is the shining light of Rabbi Meir Simcha. We remember his legend and his legacy that he left us 100 years after his passing. May his memory be a blessing, and may we all learn from his phenomenal character and his great dedication to Torah and mitzvahs. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe.